Boom, 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 boom. Sounds like goddamn Charlie Brown. I do apologize. Therefore, I'm going to play this thing again. I cannot believe that happened. Well, I don't know. I wasn't listening to chat or anything. That sounds like shit. So, let's do it again. Turn down the volume. Because I want you to hear the words coming from my step grandma, Thelma. And I don't know. I mean, the recorder is sitting right there. So, we got this over here. That's the shit to do. So, you can listen to my step grandmother. We'll see if it sounds any better. Oh, that's gone. This is a cassette tape from 1970s. I thought it was gonna be good, but no, it sounded like crap. So I'm gonna do it again.
And Uncle Clarence, who lived up the road from us. Then when Jimmy was born, Dad came and got us and took us home to see our little brother. We lived about 10 to 15 miles out in the country. The nearest town was Malvern. Jimmy was 2 years old and I was 7 when our mother died. She was only 37 years old. We believe she died of an aneurysm. Back then, I don't think they knew what it was. Mr. Bob Brown, our neighbor, made her coffin. He lived about a half a mile from us. You didn't go to a funeral home back then. They were laid out at home, and someone set up with them at night until everything was ready to bury them. I remember the night she died, and I remember being at her funeral, but I can't tell you what she looked like. I can't put a face on her. My sister Opal says the same thing. I guess it was so traumatic to us that we blocked it out of our minds. My mother and Dad married a brother and sister. Aunt Callie was Dad's sister, and Uncle Joe was my mother's brother. They had 6 kids, so I have double first cousins, too, like my grandkids do. Uncle Joe died very young also. Helen, their youngest, was the same age as me. She was only 1 year old when he died and left Aunt Callie with 6 kids to raise. Aunt Callie never remarried, but I found out years later that Dad helped her out financially. Plus, he helped put his youngest brother through college. He was crippled, and I guess Dad knew he was going to need an education. None of the 7 of us kids even got to go to high school. Dad needed us at home to work on the farm and run the dairy. Dad was a dairy farmer. We milked between 75 and 100 cows twice a day. I started milking when I was 9 years old. A few years it was just Mabel, Opal, and me doing the milking. Dad would come by the barn once in a while and milk 2 or 3. He'd say his hands was tired and he'd leave and go do something else. We had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to milk the cows. We strained, cooled, and bottled the milk, loaded it in the back of Dad's pickup, iced it down, and covered it with a heavy canvas ready for Dad to take to town and deliver on his milk route. He delivered to people's houses and also to restaurants. We also sold
You
cream
do
and
that,
butter.
lady.
Time times were very hard then. People didn't have much money. Sometimes a widow woman would tell Dad not to leave her any milk because she didn't have money to pay for it. But Dad left it anyway. He said she had kids and they needed milk. My dad had a heart as big as all outdoors. After we got the milk took care of, we had to wash and sterilize all the equipment. Bottles, buckets, cans, the bottler, the separator, scrub the floor, and then the barn. We had about 30 stanchions, 15 on each side, with a wide aisle down the middle. This was built on a concrete floor. It had to be scrubbed down clean. We had county inspectors that would come around regular to check and make sure everything was clean and up to code. We had a big high water tank at the barn that we pumped water into to use at the barn. Dad made this tank out of wood. It was round, and he covered the inside with black tar to keep it from leaking. Us kids would have to climb up there to check the water, and we'd always dig off a little piece of tar to chew. That was our chewing gum. Dad must have allowed some for us to chew because we never dug down to the wood. When Leonard and Jimmy got big enough, they helped with the work. I grew up during the Depression when times were hard and you didn't have much. There were a few years we didn't even have an outhouse. When you had to go to the bathroom, you went out behind the barn or the chicken house or even a bush, hoping no one would see you. That was before there was toilet paper, so you wiped with a corn cob, a stick, or even leaves. I thought we were rich when Dad finally built us an outhouse. We even had a two-holer, and our toilet paper was a Sears Roebuck catalog. Floyd had married by now, and Rush had left home. Floyd and Connie lived with us, and she took care of the house and did the cooking. We raised a big garden and canned enough food to last the winter. We raised our own pork and chickens, and once I remember Dad killing a beef. We didn't have electricity, and that was before there was deep freezes. So we canned the beef and some of the pork. We cured the hams and bacon. I remember it was so good. We cooked on a wood cook stove, and we didn't have running water in the house, so we had to heat water on the wood stove to do the dishes that we drew up from a well. When we washed clothes, it was an all-day job. You had to draw your water from the well, heated in a big wash pot that you built a fire under, and you boiled the clothes to get them clean. You washed them on a rub board, and if you weren't careful, you'd rub all the hide off your knuckles. For several years, we didn't have a clothesline. We'd hang them over the fence, and with a big family, you'd sometimes run out of fence. Then we'd spread them over a bush. It was a happy day when Dad built us a clothesline. Us girls wore overalls to work in. We made all our dresses and even our underwear. I was 12 or 13 when I got my first ready-made dress. I thought that was the prettiest dress I ever saw. We didn't have electricity, so our lights was a kerosene lamp. We would heat the house with the fireplace. We had to cut our own wood, and I learned real young how to chop wood and build a fire. After we got through at the barn, we'd go to the house and eat breakfast, get ready for school, and had to walk a mile to catch the school bus. We took turns coming home at noon to help work. Dad would stop by the schoolhouse on his way home from his milk route and pick me or Opal one up. By now, Mabel wasn't going to school. Dad had lots of land, so we raised lots of crops. Cotton, corn, peanuts, several kinds of beans, peas, Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes. I picked cotton, full corn, and peanuts, and picked beans and peas and dug potatoes. the crops was all gathered, we would have the corn stalks, peanut vines, and pea and bee vines to the hay barn. The peanuts were put up in the loft of the barn, and us kids, when there was a little time, picked off the peanuts for seed the next year. We always had plenty, so we could parch, or as you know, roast them, all we could eat. Then Dad would grind up some of the hay and the corn stalks, peanut, and bee vines for cow feed. We didn't waste anything. So you see, Grandma learned at an early age how to be frugal. Dad gave us kids 17 cents a 100 pounds for picking cotton. Opal and I saved our money and bought us each a cedar chest. Today, that is one of my prized possessions. I know how hard I had to work for it. Dad also gave Mabel, Opal, and myself a silver dollar to pull bitter weeds in the pasture. If the cows ate them, it would make their milk bitter and we couldn't sell it. I still have my silver dollar, and that was over 60 years ago. Those were hard times. We were poor, and as far as having money. We were poor as far as having money, but we were rich in other ways. We were all healthy. We had each other. We weren't much to say I love you, although now we do. We had a lot of fun. We didn't have toys. We played with a hoop and wheel we made. We played jacks with rocks. We used small rocks for the jacks and a little bigger one for the ball. We got really good with a ball that didn't bounce. At Christmas, we'd go to the woods and cut a little cedar tree for our Christmas tree. We'd cut up paper to hang on it and string red berries to decorate. Didn't have toys to put on it. Maybe we'd get a pair of socks or a pair of mittens. We each got an apple, an orange. I never smell an orange to this day that it doesn't remind me of Christmas, because that's the only time we got one. Dad always bought a couple boxes of stick candy, a bag of nigger toe candy, which today are called chocolate drops. He bought a fresh coconut, poked a hole in the eyes of it, and let each of us kids have a taste of the milk inside. Then he'd break the coconut up and give each of us a piece of it to eat. I love Christmas, but I think 4th of July was my favorite holiday. All my Grandpa Ledbetter's kids gathered at his house, and there was lots of cousins to play with. The men would put up makeshift tables out in the front of his house. There would be lots of good food to eat and every flavor of soda pop you'd want, plus lots of homemade lemonade and several freezers of homemade ice cream. It was the only time the whole family got together, so we treasured that day. When I was about 13 years old, Dad came home from his milk route one day, and he had this woman with him. He said, "This is Katie, your stepmother." You can imagine what a shock that was to us kids. We'd never heard of her before. She was a widow woman with 3 kids of her own. He delivered milk to her mom and dad, and her kids lived with them. That's where he met her. Well, we didn't get along very well. We wasn't with her that much because she stayed at the house and we were always at the milk barn or in the field. We had to go through their bedroom to get to ours, and she nailed the door shut to our bedroom, so we had to go around the house in all kinds of weather to get in our bedroom. She wanted us to wash dishes after supper, and we had worked in the field all day. We got so we'd go to bed without any supper to keep from washing her dishes. It was hard on us kids, and I'm sure it wasn't easy for her either. Dad saw things wasn't going to work out, so he built us a 4-room house across from the milk barn, I think, to keep us closer to our work. Mabel, Opal, and me moved into it. He told us to take Jimmy with us. Leonard was big enough to take care of himself. Katie's youngest boy was same age as Jimmy, and we didn't think she treated Jimmy right. Anyway, in later years, Katie tried to make up for the way she acted. I couldn't forget some of the things she did, but she was good to Dad and took good care of him in his later years, and we all appreciated that. There were 7 of us kids, and she had 3. Then they had 7. So Dad raised 17 children. Dad never had to tell us kids but once to do something. He never had to call us at 2 o'clock in the morning to go to milk. We knew what we were supposed to do, and we did it. When I was about 16 or 17, my brother Rush was married, and he was in the Army and stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas. They were expecting their first child, so Rush wrote home and asked if one of us girls could come and stay with them when Evelyn had the baby. Mabel and Opal both were chicken to ask, but I said he can't do any more than say no. So I asked, and he said, Sister, I won't say no, but I'd rather you didn't. As long as he didn't say I couldn't, I was going. He was beginning to buy Black Angus beef cattle by now and was getting out of the dairy business. I think he saw the writing on the wall and knew us girls wasn't always going to be around to be his farm hands. So I bought a train ticket to Fort Riley. Never been on a train before, and out of Malvern for that matter, and by myself, and was scared to death. When I got on the train, there was standing room only. It was during the war, and there were lots of soldiers on the train. I stood up a long ways, finally got a seat. I sat next to a soldier. I didn't talk to anyone or get out of my seat. I guess the soldier could tell I was just a little scared country girl. He got up and went somewhere, and when he came back, he brought me a cup of water. Rush met me at the train station, and when we got home, Evelyn was cooking dinner. She took me upstairs and showed me my room and the bathroom and told me I could freshen up before dinner. So I took a bath and just let the water run. About the time I finished, I figured out how to plug up the bathtub. That was my first encounter with a bathroom. You talk about a green country hick, but I was it. I was used to a number 3 wash tub to bathe in. Never saw an electric washing machine till then either. About a month after I left home, Opal and Mabel left home, moved to town, and both married boys we had known all our lives. I lived with Rush and Evelyn about a year, got a job at the PX there on the base as a waitress. That's where I met Maxine. She was living with her sister and brother-in-law about 3 houses down the street from Rush and Evelyn. We'd walk back and forth to work together and got to be good friends. Rush got sent overseas, and Evelyn moved back to Minnesota. Maxine's brother-in-law got shipped out the same time. Maxine asked me if I'd like to rent an apartment together and stay there and work. I said sure, so we did. Sometime later, her mother wrote and asked her to come home to see her brother before he went into service. They were from Oklahoma but had moved to Newcastle, California. So she asked me if I wanted to go to California, so I said yes. We quit our jobs, packed our belongings, caught a Greyhound bus, and it was California, here we come. We visited with her folks about a week, then came to Roseville and found a little place to live. You talk about little. You couldn't cuff a cat without getting hair in your mouth. We both went to work at McClellan Air Force Base. We met Art riding the bus to work, and he liked Maxine, so the 3 of us started going to the movies and roller skating. Then one Sunday, Art and Clinton, his cousin, was cruising around town, flirting with all the girls. Art asked Clinton if he'd mower? And Clinton said, sure. So they came over to see us, and we made a date with them for the next week. About a year later, Clinton and I got married. Art's dad and Clinton's dad was brothers from Oklahoma, and Clinton lived with them till we got married. About a year later, Maxine and Art got married, and Maxine and I became cousins by marriage. Johnny, Clinton's brother, came to the wedding and brought Jean, his date. That was when I met Jean. A short time later, Johnny and Jean got married. We were very close. For several years, we spent at least 2 weekends a month together, either at our house or theirs, until Johnny took up team roping. Then he went roping on the weekends. Our kids were very close. They would come down and spend a week with us, and our boys would go up there for a week. When we bought the place here in Penryn, that kind of stopped because of the chores the boys had to do. When we bought the place, we got a house, hay barn, milk barn, 12 head of cows and a bull, a tractor, buzz saw, mower, and hay rake, plus 10 acres of land, all for $11,500. When I was growing up at home milking all those cows, I said I'd never marry a man that would even look at a cow. I say, be careful what you say. You just might end up doing it. The people we bought the place from sold milk to the neighbors. Guess what? We inherited their customers, and I was back in the milk business. I didn't have to milk, though, just take care of it after Clinton and the boys brought it to the house. I don't think you could give Troy or Dennis, either one, a milk cow to this day. After 23 years, of marriage, Clinton died of a massive heart attack. Thank goodness both the boys were married by then. I don't know if I could have handled teenage boys by myself. Troy was in service over in England. He and Kathy had Tammy and Kimmy by now, and they got to stay in England with him. Dennis and Yarda were married but had no children. Dennis helped me to keep the place going, although we did sell the cows. Johnny died 4 months after Clinton did. Then Bram, their younger brother, and his wife Wanda and their 2 children lived out here. And not long after Clinton and Johnny both died, Brown and Wanda and their kids moved back to Oklahoma. And a couple years after they moved back, Brown died of heart problems also. Wanda, Jean, and I, and also Clinton's 3 sisters back there, have remained the best of friends and sister-in-laws. I go back and visit them as often as I can. After 13 years of being widowed, I married Bob Jacobson, a dear friend and neighbor, after he and his wife divorced. She was my best friend and remained so until she died. Bob died a year and 8 months after we married from colon cancer. Ruby remarried and lived for 12 years, and then she died of cancer also. I have been widowed again for 19 years. I have been blessed with a marriage to 2 wonderful men, have 2 wonderful sons, and I get along with my daughter-in-laws, whom I love. I also have 6 wonderful grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren, which I love dearly. I have 2 stepchildren and 7 step-grandchildren. I wouldn't trade my life for anything. I've lived through hard times when you didn't have much but each other. But I never went hungry a day in my life. A lot of times it was just cornbread and milk for supper, but we had plenty of that. Now I live when we have all the conveniences and life is easier. I think I've had the best of 2 worlds. Well, you've had a peek into the life of Grandma Johnson. I'll leave you now with a little song I used to sing to my sons, Troy and Dennis, when they were small.
That was my step grandma. Ta-da!